Welcome to Minutes to Midnight, the 5 to Midnight podcast where we explore the fascinating intersection between the art of performance and the science of wisdom cultivation. Hi, my name is Ethan Kobayashi Xie, and I am an actor trainer, practice researcher, and life coach. I'm also the artistic director of 5 to Midnight International, and this is where I do my professional work, training actors, conducting practice as research work sessions, and community and cultural events across Asia. So over the past 5 years, my company and I have been working hard at developing a performance practice that we call the integrative approach and methodology of active transformation. Now, recently, we found that it has potential to be an ecology of practice that's rooted in performance, both traditional and contemporary, that has plausible applications in the cultivation of wisdom. Now, this is where a lot of my research is contextualized, and so you often hear me speaking about Tiamat as a frame of reference. And I find that by situating it within the intersection between performance practice, neuroscience, post-Jungian psychoanalysis, and cognitive science, they provide very viable entry points into the practical work that I'm moving towards. The idea being that it drives us closer towards examining the cognitive and physical benefits of practices like yoga, tai chi, different genres of dance and music, and that these have plausible applications in personal growth and development. So a good portion of these podcasts will have reference studies into these fields as I attempt to make them practical enough for them to be applied in my own context, but also hopefully in yours. Now, this podcast is a pet project of mine to try and keep on top of the existing research, because there is a lot of it, but also sharing that research with a larger community. It's largely inspired by the series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis by John Vervaeke, which you can also find here on YouTube. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with John's work, he is a professor of cognitive science at the University of Toronto, specializing in the cognitive science of wisdom and insight. So think about things like why we have transformative experiences, what is insight, what is enlightenment. And this is all really, really fascinating work, and I strongly encourage you to, if you have the time and the opportunity and the patience, to go through his series. It's 50 hours long, but he makes a really convincing argument. And John is one of those people, I have to say this, there are some people who are just such towering intellects that you do not want to argue with them because you're never going to get a word in that they can't, one up against you. And John is not one of those people. John is one of those people who, personally, I love to argue with him because the way that he conducts himself within the dialogue is so encouraging and so enthusiastic and incredibly humble that both of us, more often than not, come away having learned much more than we had begun. So it's with that spirit that I try to bring this podcast into manifestation. And so, as much as I can, I will make a few references and try and summarize with relative accuracy some of John's points, because he's formulated this problem, the perennial problem known as the meaning crisis. And that's, for me, incredibly relevant. And he makes a very strong and convincing argument for it, which I suppose is why this podcast exists. Now, what I'm going to be doing is slightly different. I've talked about this with John and with a few others as well, that there is a ceiling, I suppose. It's quite a high bar of entry to get into the work of the cognitive science and really understand what the meaning crisis is about. So what I'm going to be trying to do is see if, as an artist, if I can make it a little bit more accessible, and not to minimize it, not to reduce the issue, which has been so wonderfully formulated, but to see if there can be some relevance brought in. and get people to really just perk the ears up and kind of listen, and really for you to see whether or not it's something that's applicable to you. Now, I am a practitioner, at least in part, and so this podcast is more of an active inquiry as to whether or not the work that I'm doing, the work that my company is doing, is actually helping to address the problem. I hope it is, and I do think there is a good case for it, but being an artist, I'm kind of pulling from a lot of things in different domains here and there. I'm what would be called a generalist. And so this podcast is also me trying to sort that shit out and try and figure out what it is. And hopefully that journey is interesting to you. Now, I'll attempt to draw some connections between the scientific literature to our growth and development as human beings, and where applicable, tie it into relationship with the broader social cultural environment and how we are being affected by the meaning crisis. So you can expect us to dive into a few questions like, why does something feel right? How do we get a sense of that? How do we enact that at will, enact that sense at will? What is karma and how do I break it? How do I find meaning in what I do? Or how do I imbue what I do with meaning? Now, this podcast will be seasonal, and each season will focus on a different topic. We'll begin by outlining, first of all, why I'm doing this work, but also what the key cognitive components behind Tiamat are, and try and get a sense, at least, of an overview of why Tiamat is formulated in the way that it is, so that we can go in, pick it apart, and say, yeah, maybe we need to relook at how this is formulating the practice. Now, I want to make a few commitments to you as an audience member of this podcast. So, this is to keep myself a little bit more in line in terms of how we're going to be progressing in this relationship. Now, the first of which is that I will do my utmost best to keep what I discuss on this podcast moving towards the practical and applicable. Now, this means doing my due diligence into the research as deeply as I can in order to find what has applications across a wide variety of domains, and that as much as possible are independently sourced so that they're all pointing towards the same kind of things. Now, if you are watching this podcast and you feel that something sticks out to you as being inaccurate or unreliable, or I've misread it or misinterpreted it, please go down into the comment section below and mark it for me. Write it in the podcast that says, hey, Ethan, you might have read something wrongly here. That's not what it means. And if you can, give a timestamp as well, so that I can go back and take a look at it. Otherwise, I'll fall into a black hole of ignorance, and then that's going to wreck us for the next 6 weeks. Now, secondly, on the back of that, I commit to bringing my subjectivity into relationship. Now, this means that I'm going to endeavor to do my best to be aware of my biases and where I might be equivocating or assuming more than I should be. Now, this is not a podcast where I tell you what I believe, but instead to combine what I am thinking and feeling and sensing and having opinions about with what other people might be looking and researching, and then seeing if that combination is able to help formulate practice that is useful, things that you can do, things that I can take into my own practice, and then hopefully both of us benefit. It is impossible to remain completely unbiased. So I aim to bring that in reference to what I'm going to be discussing on the podcast. And hopefully my awareness of biases can help push us away from more and more biases and towards something more actionable. Now, how I'd like to mark that is with questions as an indicator of arriving at knowing what I don't know. So this is not an individual effort. It's in the interest of invoking some collective wisdom. If you do have questions that are coming up for you as you're watching this podcast, again, I invite you to notice when they are appearing, go down into the comment section with a timestamp if possible. If not, that's also okay. But to type those questions down and see if that also provokes other members of the audience to go, hey man, that's really interesting. Let's discuss that a little bit. And see if we can get into some kind of dialogue in the comment section. Now, this does quite a lot for moving the discussion forward and would also generate new topics that I might not have even thought of to look into in the future. Okay, so thirdly, on top of articulating my own subjectivity and positionality, I will make a commitment to change my stances where there is sufficient evidence and reason to do so. This has a lot to do with the nature of what we're going to be discussing, which is largely invisible to the naked eye. So where I might falter or I might, follow a train of logic that takes me off of the edge of the cliff of plausibility, I will endeavor to mark that in the podcast. So I'll also go back and take a look at those timestamps that you've highlighted that might need adjustment, and then put in the necessary edits and changes where colleagues, friends, communities, or collaborators have let me know that it's particularly salient. So if you happen to notice an error like that, please let me know in the comment section, and I will examine it further. Now, lastly, building on that, I will make a commitment to you to credit others' work with precision and clarity. It is an absolute privilege to have access to the contributions of so many colleagues across different disciplines. And I'm going to be trying to bridge some of those ideas. However, access to these studies are not always free. So if you would like to support the podcast, you can go down to our Patreon. The link can be found below. As you can probably already tell, I am hyperverbal, and there will be times where I would just go off, fam. And so in cases like that, I might not be able to necessarily say, this came from this book and this person. However, I will put them down in the video description and even include them in the video after I edit them, so that that information is available to you as much as possible. Now, coming back to donations, they will help fund the research by allowing me to pay our colleagues for their papers and their contributions, as well as for the practical experiments that I am doing with TMAT. So if I do miss out on a credit, again, let me know in the comment section or send me an email at ethan@5tomidnight.org and I will remedy that post-haste. As a quick disclaimer, I am not a medical doctor. Neither am I a professional cognitive scientist or psychologist. I am an artist first and foremost. And these topics are fields which I find very relevant to the work that I do with artists and in my own practice. Now, I employ some of this work into my endeavors as a coach, but coaching is not therapy. And so if you are engaging in some of these practices, please do so at your own discretion. And if needed, please inform your therapist beforehand to receive some professional advice. I am here to share this information from a paradigm and a context where I can be responsible as a facilitator for people who are working directly with me. But if you are not in that context, again, please use your own discretion. I do not prescribe anything. But so long as you are experimenting with your own context in your own safety and you can take responsibility for your own safeguards and you experience some benefits, and then I extend my deepest congratulations to you. I'm really glad that it's helpful for you. And please let me know of that because I'd love to hear from you. And of course, subscribing to the podcast and turning notifications on is already a huge help. So I look forward to speaking to and with you all a lot more. So with that, welcome to Minutes to Midnight. Now, let's get started. Okay. So, what is the meaning crisis? In a nutshell, I'll try and summarize John's argument as much as possible, is that the very cognitive mechanics that we have evolved to help us survive in the world also makes us susceptible to self-deception and self-destruction. I am not going to try and crunch down his entire 50-hour lecture series into a sentence. I think that doesn't do him justice. But instead, I'd like to share a little bit of my own meaning crisis and my own wrestling with it. Yeah, so hopefully with this anecdote, it's going to be a long anecdote, but I'm going to try and use it as an allegory to explain my understanding of what meaning is. So in 2014, I was given the opportunity to go to drama school in London. And at that time, like, I was working professionally as an actor for about 6 or 7 years at that point, and it started, as a kid. I was doing some commercials, and I was doing TV series, and then graduated into plays. And then I went into the army. And so in the army, I spent a lot of time studying, reading a lot of books. And I got the chance to do what I felt at the time was like, man, this is living the dream. I get to go to drama school in London and be an actor. Okay. No idea what that meant. I had no idea what it entailed. But drama school, for those of you who don't know, unless you happen to be a drama school student and you're watching this, drama school is kind of intense, man. It's a conservatory kind of setting, at least the school where I was at, which meant we'd have classes 5 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And it was full-on work. Voice classes, movement classes. We have studies for plays and dramatic literature. All that, actually really, really good stuff. And so when I think about that, I spent my first year in a blur, pretty much. And when I mean a blur, it's kind of like, when you wake up and you've just had a dream, but you're trying to remember what the dream is, and you know that certain, maybe 1 or 2 things happened. You know that you had a dream, but it's a bit foggy, right? It's empty. It's it's not a living memory. That's kind of what the first year of drama school was like for me. And there are a few things which I do remember, though. And I can remember where this fog first came rolling in. It was one of the first days in drama school. And I got into my first acting class. And for 4 hours, right, we were told to be in this room, and we were improvising. And it's we're running around the space and, trying, embody this quality and then try move with this quality and and it was very, what's the word? We were being pushed, being pushed really to the boundary of our physical capabilities, because we don't stop moving, but also to emotional capabilities. And at the end of the session, we were kind of brought together in a circle, and we were asked to hold hands, and the room was really dark. And my teacher was this short Irish lady. And she told us, like, all of us gathered in the circle, we're sweating, you know. And she's like, all right, so now you're going to take turns, and you're going to stand in the center of the circle. You're going to declare your name and say, I am an actor. And it's like, I distinctly remember the two parts of me at this point. Like, one part of me was like, what? And the other part of me was like, yeah, okay, you know, that feels correct. And I distinctly remember feeling like I was going to make a decision to erase my identity, or at least like replace my identity with something. You know, this was already done, like physically. All drama school students are supposed to wear black and you know, like keep your hair, you know, a certain way and all that sort of stuff. But I was watching as my classmates were doing this thing, and they would step in and like, oh, my name is Sabla, and I'm an actor. And you would step back into the circle, and then the next person would go. And it sort of like came around to me, and I remember like silencing this chunk of me that was even a little bit skeptical. Okay, no, shut up. Like, you're here already. Just do this thing, right? And so I went on and I made the decision to go, oh, my name is Ethan and I'm an actor. It's really funny now that I think about it. You know, yeah, but then after that I feel like that sort of started a cascade of fog. You know, I spent, what was that, like 6 days a week in school. You know, so I would go in Monday 8 a.m. To 6 p.m. and then from 6 p.m. I would go into the student services center and book out like practice rooms in the basement, and I would be there until like 11 p.m. just banging stuff out, like banging out my homework and banging out pieces of text that I needed to learn, and practicing the tricks of the trade. And so I had to sacrifice really like social interactions. I didn't have like drinks with my classmates. I didn't really even get to know them, to be honest. I was really isolated. But there was this, like, the part of me that cried and said I am an actor was justifying that and saying like, no, that's part of the gig, you know. And I remember also having like feelings of resentment, like, man, what are you guys doing drinking? You know, you should be, you know, busting your ass. You should be, you know, taking this a little bit more seriously. And like, that's the self-deception, you know, for me. Because like, I was in a classroom with strangers for a year. I didn't really get to know any of them. And to be fair, I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. Like, when I talk about these things as like tricks of the trade, like learning acting technique, I kind of mean that scientifically. Like, I was learning a lot of techniques which I knew I could employ. They were procedural, but it wasn't changing the way that I looked at the world. It wasn't helping things to make sense and click. It just felt like these were the things that I gotta do because I'm a drama school student. You know, I had not considered the larger ramifications of what I was there to actually do. I just felt myself like, okay, going through the motions, and like, I got a lot of great skill out of it. Like, don't get me wrong. I mean, I learned great skills from competent people. But yeah, it wasn't changing my experience of life, and so this is something which for me really really registered as at least now like registered in hindsight as the difference between what Zeami calls imitation and embodiment. That with imitation is like we're learning the tricks of the trade, but embodiment is actually changing the way that I perceive the world and take things into my experience. And nonetheless, I just let this continue for like a year. It didn't really make my grades any better. That was the weirdest part. Like, I was busting my ass for, pretty much 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And was still just doing, all right. No better or worse than anyone else. But more than anything, I was just kind of chasing grades. So, I'll take a pause here for a moment and just articulate that this is one of the kind of components of meaning. I believe this is Hanselman's theory, that meaning comprises of coherence, significance, and purpose. So, coherence in a sense of how things fit together. I had none of that. Like, I didn't know how some of the voice things that we were doing or how some of the acting things we were doing coalesced together. It made sense within the curriculum, like with regards to the plays that we were asked to do, but that really wasn't the kind of work that I was interested in doing. We were doing kind of the classic stuff, and you do your Chekhov, you do your Shakespeare, you do your Brecht. There's Stanislavski technique and all that. But I was very interested in doing like site-specific work and creating work from the ground up. So, it felt kind of didn't really fit. On top of that, there were things like, we did accent classes. And which is really weird to me now that I think about it, because I never had the intention to work in the UK. Like, I always thought I'd, just go there, learn to be an actor, come back, integrate the skills, and then work locally in Singapore, where I'm from. But that didn't really seem to gel. And of course, there's also this question of like style and audience. What an audience in one particular cultural context finds resonant is not necessarily the same as what another culture would find resonant in a different context. So that's, for me, my wrestling with coherence. And then there's that sense of significance. Like, was what I was engaging in helping me to become more whole, more one, more myself, more authentic? Did it feel right with me, RIGHT? And in hindsight, not really, if I'm honest. It kind of felt like I was doing something that I needed to do in order to walk the path of this identity that I had claimed for myself, or had been made to claim for myself. And it was, tricks of the trade. And then there's that sense of the larger purpose. Like, where is this in the grand narrative of my life? I know where that year is now, but at the time I didn't know it. I had no idea of what this was for. And I think that had come out of, like, me going into the army for 2 years, and then making the mistake of not giving myself a break. Like, I really, in hindsight, I should have taken a gap year to recollect, having, just come out of a very regimented institution, right? Because that's what the army is. I really should have given myself that 1 year of time to kind of get settled. But now I was, in my mid-20s and really impatient. So I wasn't keen on doing that. I just wanted to go straight from one context, which had me for 2 years, and then go straight into another one that would have me for 3. It became very difficult to find myself in a position where I was a character in my own story. And don't even talk about the main character, just a character in the main story. So, yeah, that was pretty much my first year. And the second year, or at least the space between, was very different for me. I got the opportunity to go to the Watermill Center in New York, which is run by the avant-garde theater legend Robert Wilson. And for a little bit of context, like, Bob Wilson is, he is the guy that I was reading about in textbooks for years. I was a huge fan of his work, and he's legendary for being absolutely pedantic about where everything is on stage. He's famous for, like, sitting in the director's chair and moving things on stage like minute amounts, like half an inch to the left, or this thing has to go on exactly this moment, no sooner, no later, absolute precision. A total auteur. And he has this residency program in the summer up in the Hamptons of New York. And it was, I believe it's free actually. Like if you apply and you get selected, it's free. And so I was fortunate enough to get picked, which is another kind of like, wow, like dream come true kind of scenario. And so I was like, 25 at that point, something like that, maybe 24, 2000 and, about 2015, so about 20, around there. So just going into the Hamptons, I remember like stepping off the plane at JFK. It's like, I cannot believe I'm here. Oh my God, there's that, it was for me that sensation of like being punched in the face by a giant marshmallow. And it's just like, oh, yes. Now, in contrast to my first year at drama school, Watermill was like, even now I can still quite like feel the memory. It's still very much alive for me. I remember like just driving a golf cart and driving a golf cart to throw trash in the middle of the day. I remember being able to like walk the grounds whenever I wanted, and to see artists, carpenters, researchers, painters, all working on their projects, and it's massively diverse. You can propose something that you want to do, and you just do it. And it was an intercultural space. So we had people from all over. We had people from like France, Malaysia, Taiwan, Indonesia. There's like so many, Germany, a lot of Germans. And I was working in the kitchen, actually. I love to work in the kitchen. And we were there with a couple of Indonesian chefs. And one of them later became my best friend, Abdi. He helped to found the company, actually. So, okay. So, story of Watermill, part 2. Right. So, it was like, I think about 4 days or something like that before Bob arrived. And mind you, in my head, like, Bob is this really kind of, again, a towering figure, huge reputation. He's a living legend. And I remember the first day he arrived, right, I was throwing the trash. And he had driven out to the driveway and was about to come through the front door. And like I had just walked through the main corridor to kind of like with the trash, trying to get to the dumpster at the back, and everybody was like lining up in the atrium. Okay, like literally like soldiers, man. There were 2 rows of people, and they were just lining up for him, and they were all patiently waiting for him to enter. Right. So I was carrying the trash, and I went out, and I realized the back door was like I had gone out the back door, but then for some reason I couldn't throw the trash. I think it was that the golf cart or whatever was being used or something like that. But I had to go back around the front, and so I walked around the compound, came back to the front door, and Bob had already walked in, right? And I could just see him from like behind the glass, and I was standing right behind him, holding this giant like bag of trash. And like everybody who was on his like periphery just went like, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And freaking out, like his presence was so commanding that everybody had to just like fall in line, and like I had to fall like out of view. So anyway, sorry. So anyway, that evening, we had like a nice dinner, welcome dinner, and then we had supper. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm gonna introduce myself. I'm gonna introduce myself to Robert Wilson. This is gonna be terrifying and great. So I was like, walking through the kitchen, and I plucked up my courage, and I went like, I was like, "Hi, Bob. Yeah, pleasure to meet you. My name is Ethan," and da da da. Right? And he went, like, he didn't even look at me. He went, oh, hi. And then he just like turned, and he saw someone behind me, and he went, "Tristan, my favorite." And then he sort of walked over, and I fell completely out of his locus of attention. It's gone. And then he just had this conversation with Tristan. Very, very, very nice guy, Tristan, actually. So that was the first time that I introduced myself to Bob. Okay. Now the second time was the next day. Right. He was coming through the kitchen again, and I was sitting down having some drinks with a friend from Lithuania. And I was just having my drink, and then I saw him come by, and I was like, I plucked up my courage. I was like, okay, I'm going to go and introduce myself to Bob Wilson again. So I got up when Bob's like, "Hi, Bob. My name is Ethan." Da, da, da. He didn't remember me at all. But he was like, okay. Well, let me give you a tour of Watermill. And I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, let's go and do this. And we just followed him around, me and my friend, the architect, sort of followed him through this space. And Watermill is an amazing building. Like, it's clean without being sterile. It's clean in the way that like a blank canvas is clean. It's clean with possibility. And Bob was taking us on this journey of like, this is the room, this is the knee building, and I designed this to look, this way, and that this entrance here faces the south, this entrance here faces the north, and he's giving us this like living recollection of the history of the space. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic, And so he finishes the tour, right? And then he brings us back to the kitchen. And at the end of the kitchen is this is a meeting room. And this meeting room has a giant round, perfectly round wooden table that was made by the participants a few years ago. And around the table are, I think they're called Quaker chairs. And they're these beautiful, beautiful wooden chairs with like this like cross-hatch kind of fabric on them. And it begins. He pulls up a chair, sits down at the edge of the kitchen, and me and Inga, he stops at the dining table, and then he goes like, "Okay, so that chair at 9 o'clock needs to move to 11 o'clock. No, the red one." And it's like, we have to go in and do this. Like, you stand there, you hold the chair, and you're like turning it like a little bit, and you're like, "No, like 3 inches to the left." And it's like, okay, too much, sorry. Go back. And he was like, at one point he said, he got a bit frustrated, I remember. He was like, "No, it's like that's not it. Like, stand outside of it, look at it." And so he would pull me, by the arm and like to stand where he was standing, and he's like, "Look at it. That's not right." And I was like, "What do you mean it's not right? Like, I can't, you know what I mean? Like, I can't see in what ways it's not right." So, go back in and do it again and shift it again. And we were doing this for like bloody an hour, I think. Something like that. And this was, pretty much midnight or after. And so we finally like finish. And then, I sort of sit down next to him, and he's telling me stories about, he had been telling me stories about pieces that were strewn around Watermill, and he was still going on a few of them. And I was kind of like sitting at the foot of his chair, and he was sitting on a chair where I was about like shoulder height, and I was just listening to him tell these stories. And I asked him, like, "Bob, how do you remember all this stuff?" And he kind of like looks at me. For the first time, actually, I think that's how he looked at me. And then he smiled, like the most generous smile ever. Like he had just told himself a joke. And he said, "I'm old." And I'll never forget this moment. That was the moment that, for me, he stopped being the guy that I read about in textbooks. He stopped being Robert Wilson. He became Bob. Just Bob. And it's a really magical moment, because I suddenly felt like, the exercise that we were just doing, or the arranging of the chairs, not even an exercise, but that suddenly felt like it was, significant. And I don't mean significant in an artistic sense. I don't mean significant in like an aesthetic sense, like, now I get it. It's a little bit more ineffable than that. It was as if by participating in this activity, I could release myself from the pedestal that I had put him on. You get what I mean? It really changed the way that I perceived him even. He was no longer the person that sort of made people fall in line. He just became, cool ass grandpa. And so this radically changed my experience for the duration of the 6 weeks that I was there. And this has to do with the atrium. Okay, so let's call it this chunk of the story as, in a way, helped me to reclaim significance. Like the activity, the time that I was spending there was now significant. So, the atrium. In Watermill, when you walk into the main building, into this beautiful atrium with the kitchen on your left and just these shelves on the right, the gallery beyond it. And on these shelves are plates, antique plates. Some of these are like, I don't know, like a few hundreds of years old, maybe thousands of years old. And they come from all over, man, like Indonesian or Native American, some Chinese plates. And we use them for salad and serving. Like, so every time we cook, we bring these plates down, we put the food on them, and then we have them like stacked out like a buffet kind of thing. Yeah. And so we would have to wash these every day when we're done eating and then put them back on the shelves. I mean, of course, this is a very bizarre thing to do with antique plates that are, you know, worth more than my plane ticket there for the most part. And so I remember at some point, like, I think I asked one of our chefs, it's like, why do we do that? Why do we use the antique plates for this? And he said to me, like, shared a little bit of Bob's philosophy behind it, is that these plates are works of art. They are meant to be lived and used and engaged with. And if they are not, they just belong in a museum, and this is not a museum. You know, we're meant to, how do I say this? Enliven them, right, by using them. And so there was like, I think a couple of days that I would be putting these plates back. And Bob would come by and go like, no, it's not there. Move it somewhere else. And so I happen to be one of the few people who were living at the center. We have some dormitories upstairs on the second floor for like 8 people. The rest of the participants were living in houses around the Hamptons. And I was living in these dormitories. And so at night, I would come down and I would arrange the plates. Like, and go into the atrium, and people had finished the food and just put them up on the shelves, but, you know, somewhat, I wouldn't say haphazard, but it was not ideal. So there were some days that I would just do this. You know, I would just like go into the atrium and I would take these plates down, and then I'd put them back up, and then step out, take a look at it, go back in, readjust it, come back out, take a look at it again, you know, before I would stack onto a plate, the next plate, next plate, next plate. And I remember one day I was doing this and I thought, oh my God, like, it's already like 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, I really hope that Bob doesn't come in. Because I'm only halfway done, and he'll ask me to take everything down and start again. And the second that I had that thought, Bob pulls into the driveway and he like walks into the door, and I'm going, oh shit. And so he walks in, takes a look at the shelf, and is absolutely silent. He's like, And I'm shitting my pants behind him. Like, and then he turns and then he says, okay, let's do this together. And then we could go to bed. I was like, I start to like take the plates down, and he goes, no, it's fine. Leave it. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, half the work done. And excuse me, still have COVID. And so he starts like, we really start working on this arrangement, I suppose you call it, together. You know, he'll like point, you know, and say, okay, you know, like this one over here, this one over here. Yeah. And then I kind of found myself like a little bit passive. I had given up my agency in a way and just gone like, okay, I'll just let him tell me what to do. And I don't know, that didn't feel right to me. Like I just sort of, I felt like I was pushing something down or like pushing something away. And so at what point we are like standing side by side and looking at this thing. And so I asked him, Bob, what do you think about this yellow one going up right next to the red one? And he goes, try it. I'm like, what? Mark, try it? Okay. Take the yellow plate and like put it there and then like arrange it. You know, and step outside and look at it. And he says, yeah. I just, that really wrecked my brain. It really changed the way that I would perceive the process of creating beauty. You know, and let me break this down a little bit, right? Because it's not just that I was getting some kind of external validation. I was, and that felt great. But it changed the way that I looked at how beauty is formed. I used to think that beauty was formed unilaterally. Right? And here, the, I suppose, expert of unilateral beauty is now telling me and showing me at least that it's not. It's not that way. It's not unilateral. It doesn't have to be. And so, again, I'd like to take a pause here and bring in this sense of coherence. That it wasn't just that the plate fit on the shelf. It's that the process in which the plate is moved to the shelf, the process of this negotiation, of being able to step in, put something there, come out, take a look at it, you know, bring up a suggestion, right, and put it there. That all seemed to fit in this very simple activity. There was coherence in the way that I could enact my agency in a space, and that seemed to manifest itself when we were done in the world. And you sort of like look at it and go, wow, okay, now I can see the product of that coherence, and it's not as important as the process was. So the third part, as we had just finished up here, he was leaving to go to his elevator up to his room. And as he was walking past me, he asked this question. What's going to happen to Watermill after I die? I mean, that question is still sort of sitting with me as something to contemplate on. Like, what is the value of legacy? What is legacy? And I found him like incredibly human at that point. And so, I said like, well, I mean, I could come in and arrange the plates. And then he chuckled and then went into the lift. And then as the doors were closing, he looked through the doors and he said like, okay, I love you, good night. I was like, wow. It's really bizarre because I don't know, even now, like, I can't really describe it. There was a sense there of a kind of purpose. And this, I suppose, is the third point of meaning. I had a certain sense that, I could arrange plates for the rest of my life. This aspiration, I'll put it there, of like, okay, the I love you at the end felt like, okay, I kind of can see the potential of art now. I don't know if this is making sense, right? But like, it has weight. Art has weight now. It's not an art for art's sake thing. It's like for my own subjective experience, as like a 20-something-year-old artist, it's like, okay, no, now beauty actually has weight. So I had come away from Watermill with a sense of newfound significance. Like, I understood a little bit more about how art itself, or the process of making art, was making myself a little bit more whole. I had a sense of coherence in the sense that I started to be able to enact my agency and things would fit together. Like, there was a kind of, I could make meaningful actions in the world, at least the world of the atrium. And that there was a larger sense of purpose. I knew that, okay, I wanted to have this kind of feeling, or that this feeling itself, this was a revelation that this would be an experience that I wouldn't forget ever in my life. And it's just arranging plates. So I got back to drama school, start my second year after that. And man, that's it's a very, very different experience after that. I don't remember, again, like anything I don't remember the school life necessarily. But after that, I was very clear that I want to get, an international group of people together. I want to experiment a little bit more with what's beneath the tricks of the trade. Aside from the technique, what more is there? Is there something that was irrevocably human within the craft of performance? How do I find that thing? Does it even exist? And so that was kind of one of the starting questions of my research. Like, is there even an intercultural actor training method? Is there something like that? Something that trained the human being. And so what I did was I would go again to student services. But this time I didn't book out the practice rooms. I booked out the church. We had this huge church function room type thing, which the school would rent from the church. And I would go in and book in as many of those days as I can. And so it was every day that I could manage. I would be spending my 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. there after my dinner. And at first I was getting, like my seniors to come over, the ones who were like a year above me, something like that. And, asking them to say, hey, do you want to come and experiment with things that are not being taught here? Things that are not in the syllabus. Right, let's just go pull some books from the library, see what exercises we can run, and like run those things. And like experiment with each other. And then I started to go out a little bit more. I started to spend more time outside. And I found this guy. I went to watch a show at the Barbican, and I was eating at a restaurant nearby. And I had met this guy. And it turns out that he had graduated from the same school that I did. And so I was like, oh, dude, it was just like strike up conversation. It's like, what course did you graduate from? And he was like, oh, I did a master's in contemporary performance, or a master's in classical performance. I was like, dude, no way. And he's like, yeah. So do you want your pickle on the side or in the burger? I was like, dude, what? Dude, you have a... Mate, you have a master's degree. Why are you serving me burgers? So I invited him to these sessions. And I think I must have gotten another guy. It was another dude who was like working at Burger and Lobster. And he is a musician, also wanted to be an actor. So I also had like a couple of, I think I had one biologist, and one more girl, her friend, who wanted to be an actress. And so it was a group of us, like completely it was a mix, it was a mixed group of some of them really drama school students and some of them just like not, experimenting and playing around in these spaces. And my school life started to change. I started to notice that some things weren't really making sense. Right? I started to lean into some of these things which were a little bit more, which were sticking out to me, and I tried to poke them a little bit. Right. One of those things is like we were told to always do scrapbooking for every project. Right. We needed to scrapbook. That was really important. We had to get our hands dirty and find some pictures and paste them in the thing, and write some stuff. And, I hated doing that. Like I really didn't like doing that. I don't know why it didn't quite sit with me, but I preferred like doing things digitally. I preferred music. I preferred working with the body and just experimenting physically. I love experimenting with text and the act of speaking. I really enjoy film, so I would like cut clips together and make a film scrapbook sort of. But they made it very clear to me that if I didn't submit a scrapbook, they would fail me. And so I went, okay. I went out to W.H. Smith and I got myself one of these like paper, like these like small A5 size kind of books. And then I just went on like Google Image and like Pinterest or whatever, Tumblr. I think Tumblr, a lot of it at that time. And I just saved hundreds and hundreds of pictures. No curation, no whatever. I just saved hundreds of random pictures. And then I spent an entire day in my bed with this book before term started and just pasted these pictures in the book. Just completely randomly. And I would put in like chapter titles at the top, and that was it. No, nothing else. That was before term even started. It wasn't like I was doing it at the end, just did it at the start. At the end of, I never brought it to school or anything. At the end of term, I just handed that in, and I got an A. It was like, that was really bizarre to me. I'm not super proud of it. I think like if it does work for you, scrapbooking does work for you, it's like by all means go ahead. But the fragility of the system, the rubric that they gave me was very apparent to me at that point. But I also found things particularly salient, like it was very difficult to find plays that were written by Asians. At that time there was a lot of like this. What was it like? The diversity and equity argument was just coming through, and that was very prevalent in the school. And there wasn't the kind of camaraderie which I found at Watermill. There wasn't really a sense that there was something deeper in the craft of acting. It felt very much vocational. And I was being told this as well, is like, you're here, just learn the tricks of the trade, do the job, and then, go get an agent and then be done with it, right? And I was like, yeah, but I want to make art. I want to make, like, whatever art is. I don't even know what that is, but I know it's not that. It's not just go in, do the thing, and then bugger off. And so I wouldn't shut up about it. And by the end of the second year, something really weird happened. I have dyspraxia. So what that means is that, like, I can't really sense my body as well as most people can. It affects different people differently, but like, think of it as dyslexia for the body. Right? So I can't tell left and right. For example, it makes it really hard for me to learn any kind of choreography or whatever. So I had failed a dance assignment. Yeah, like more of a dance assessment thing. I failed it. And so if you fail something, you're allowed to retake it. Right? Apparently once more only. So I tried to retake the dance assessment, and I failed it again. And the feedback that I got was something to do with like inner life, like not much connection to some inner life or something abstract like that. It was really weird. I had like one extra goal before I failed, and they kicked me out. So I got expelled from school for failing a dance assessment, and I had gone and asked some of my seniors, did you ever fail like a assessment for dance or acting or whatever? And they were like, yeah, we failed many times. Like, just kept taking it until we passed. And some of them were still doing that. Like, they would take it like 3-4 times over. And for some weird reason, I was not allowed to do that. Weird. Anyway, that was sort of me leaving drama school. And I was fortunate enough to, go to Italy after that for residency. And maybe I'll share more stories from that afterwards, but in a later episode. But that point on was me going to Indonesia, Taiwan, Japan, where I met my wife. I wouldn't say 5 Midnight was born at that point in time, but the seed of it was definitely there. I had been invited to go to Indonesia first by my friend who I worked with at Watermill. And he knows that I've been working on some experiments, and I said, hey, can I just come in and share what I found? And he said, yeah, okay. I'll invite my friends and we can come and do. So we'll come and just do something for 10 days. And I rocked up to Indonesia, scared shitless, no sense of like having ever facilitated anything before or, led a workshop for people above the age of 15 and 16 at that point. I could teach high school kids, but not this, right? But, I could actually like have an opportunity to sit down and say, okay, these are the things that we have found, these are some of the experiments that we've done, let me just run them with these totally new friends. And that was when it really struck me that I can actually experiment and claim my agency here. That I've been released from this fog. Yeah. Suddenly the sense of coherence, significance, purpose was there. I never thought about it this way. I mean, of course, this is not me saying that, okay, I'm an enlightened being now, whatever. I'm not. Far from it, actually. But this is pretty much the stage of the journey where I'm at, where I think, maybe this is fair to say, Tiamat is kind of my way of figuring out how I make meaning in my life. And I suppose the hope is that if it's helpful for me, maybe it's helpful for some other people. Yeah, it might be helpful for somebody else. It might be helpful for you. I don't know. But more than anything, I'm trying to figure out how that happens. Yeah. So, on the back of that, thank you for listening to the story. Next video, I'd like to zoom out a little bit more and try and put some provisional names on what I think I can use to explain where I'm at the moment. And so I'll do an overview of what Tiamat is, what are the cognitive mechanics that exist within the system. We'll talk a little bit about metacognition, interoception, or introception, depending on which part of the world you're from, transjective rationality, and active imagination. I'll do a little bit of an overview of this, and then I'll start putting forward at least an argument for why I feel Tiamat might be able to work as an ecology of practices. Right. Thank you for your time.